Specializes in the remediation of social skill deficits in children, adolescents, and adults with ASD and nonverbal learning disabilities. She serves as consultant to various New York and New Jersey schools, devising and implementing social skill and behavioral programs, as well as training parents and teachers. I'm also delighted to introduce our technical facilitator, Eitan, who will be working with us and can be reached through the chat box should you have any technical difficulties. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Mindy.
Hi, how are you? Thank you all for joining. I know it's a busy time of year. Before we start, I'm going to list 3 separate sentences. We'll do one at a time. And after each one, if you agree with it, if you could click on that small check. And if you disagree, if you could click on the X. So the first statement is that if a child has high self-esteem, they are more likely to succeed in life. If you agree with that statement, if you could just click on the green check button, and that way we'll be able to see how many people agree. And if you disagree, if you could click on the red X. So the question is, if a child has high self-esteem, are they more likely to succeed in life? I see that I do have some checks over here, and that is 100% correct. High self-esteem has definitely been correlated with greater success in life, and the way we determine success in life is in terms of academically, in terms of socially, in terms of holding down certain jobs and relationships. The second statement that I have is self-esteem is an indication of teachers and parents. So that means if a child has poor self-esteem, it's the teachers and parents' fault, and vice versa. If you agree with that statement, then you can click on the check again. And if you disagree with that statement, then you can click on the X. So once again, that second statement is that if a child has a high self-esteem or a low self-esteem, that is to the credit or to the blame of their parents or teachers. I see this one's a trickier one, so we have less response. Now I'm scrolling down. I see a mix. Some people feel that it is, other people feel that it's not. Now, the truth of the matter is it's a tricky question because it's not to their blame and it's not to their credit, but they can do something about it. So, and very often when I meet with parents, they'll tell me like, wow, my child has such a poor self-esteem. It must be something that I'm doing wrong. And I had this conversation. I said, well, how many children do you have? And this mother said 14. I said, and how are the other ones? No, the other ones are all fine. I said, okay, so how could it be an indication of you? But on the other hand, it does not absolve the parents of responsibility because there are still different things that you could do or not do in order to build it. And that really answers my last question because my last question is self-esteem static or can it change and develop with time? And once again, if we could put a check or an X. And the truth is that this sentence is very important before we go further because we have to understand and believe what is our thought process regarding self-esteem. Do we believe that it's something that can be cultivated, it's something that can change, or if somebody presents with a low self-esteem, that's the way they are? So I'm happy to see that we have a lot of checks because the research shows that self-esteem definitely can change, and it does change, and it evolves all the time. And at different points in a person's life, they can have a higher sense of self, and at other points, they can have a lower sense of self. So once we know that this is a skill or this is an idea, but this is something that can be changed and developed, so then the whole way that we'll approach the concept will be different. Our goal tonight is to understand what is self-esteem, why is it important, what is the role of the parent and the teacher in building self-esteem, and then practical tools in order to utilize that role. We're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. Confidence, it's not what you are that holds you back, it's what you think you're not. And now we're going to ask another question. Is there any area in your life where you feel that you are not good at? If there is, then put a check next to your name. So I don't know how to put a check next to my name, but I would definitely put a check. I think I am not good with directions. That's why I have 3 GPSs and 2 cell phones with Waze, never to take any chances. Is there any area in your life that you feel you are not good at? And I'm very happy to see that we have a lot of checks. That means we have an honest and realistic group out there. And of course there is. Now, does that mean that we have low self-esteem because there are areas that we're not good in? For sure not. However, the areas that we don't feel good about ourselves, what we do is we have two wonderful coping mechanisms. The first thing we do is we avoid it. I will not go somewhere without first printing out directions and having my GPS because I want to avoid looking or feeling like a fool for getting lost. I also don't know how to dance. I know I'm not a good dancer. So what do? I will not attend a dance class. I try my hardest not really to dance too much at weddings and kind of just to like shuffle my feet and smile, and I'm okay. It doesn't bother me. If, however, life was all about directions and dancing, and I was forced every day to sit in a class from morning to night where everyone was dancing and following directions, well then would my self-esteem stay as high as it is now? Now, the answer to this question is obvious. It wouldn't. So as adults, we really are lucky most of the time where we have that advantage where we could pick and choose to utilize our strengths and to work within our strengths because that's what makes us feel good. But a child has much less control over their environment, and their environment plays an even more significant role on their self-image. Next. So what we want to do tonight is we want to explain exactly what self-esteem is in terms of its four components, which are self-concept, self-awareness, self-esteem, and self-control. We want to talk about why having a healthy self-esteem is so important. You know, I work a lot with older parents, and they tell me, in my days and age, we didn't worry about self-esteem. Is it really so important? And then I print out articles for them about why it is so important and how a person can accomplish so much more if they have a healthy sense of self. Why here? In this forum of Hidden Sparks, where it's all about education and helping teachers and parents deal with students, why are we talking about self-esteem? And the truth is that we need to, because self-esteem is going to be a key to generalization of any areas. Like when we talk about social skills, for instance, or focusing, or executive functioning, or any of the other wonderful topics that are out there and we're learning about, if a child does not feel good about themselves, they are not going to exercise those skills. They're not going to be motivated to work on themselves and grow in that way. Therefore, it's a real stepping stone for academic, social, and personal growth, right? Like a little engine that could. If we think we can, then we will. If we have that sense of self where we believe, A, that we are capable of accomplishing, and B, that we are worthwhile to put in that effort, then guess what? We do. It's a prerequisite for self-control, which we'll explain a little bit later. And schools, fortunately and unfortunately, play a very large role in that developing a sense of self, which we'll go through as well. And then last, and of course most importantly, we will talk about different approaches of how to implement self-esteem. Specifically, we will talk a little bit about cognitive behavioral thinking, self-affirmation, developing competence, and a positive explanatory style. In the next slide, we talk about the 4 parts of self. Self-awareness is only one part of the bucket. The first part is self-concept. Self-concept is defined as learning things about yourself. Now, if we're talking about learning things about yourself, when do we think this takes place? If you think this takes place before a child turns 1, if you could click on the checkbox. If you feel this takes place only when a child is big enough to talk, then put an X. So if you believe in the talking, put an X. If you believe that a child can already learn things about themselves before they can speak, then put a check. Okay, we see all checks, and that's 100% true. What can a child learn about themselves if they can't speak? Any ideas, feel free to add in, and we'll go through them afterwards. But everything. When you have a little child who looks in the mirror and notices that that's a part of himself, or go even earlier when they start discovering that they have toes and they stick their toes in their mouth, that is self-concept. That means I am learning certain things about myself. Now that's a prerequisite for understanding the world and for determining my worth. So first I have to know myself. Now as I know myself, it branches out into the next level, and that next level is self-awareness. Self-awareness means it's not just what I know about myself, but now I understand that I have a power to impact other people in my environment. So take again that little baby. When he discovered his toes, that was self-concept. When he discovered that crying brings his mother running, that's self-awareness. Well, now I have that power. Or if I pull my brother's hair, I get to witness a whole song and dance when he screams and yells. Once again, that's self-awareness. Now, understanding this in this breakdown leads it into self-esteem quite obviously, because if I have that power over other people, well then guess what? I must be worth something, because look, I can impact my environment. Now this concept and this theory could partially explain why children that grow up with a neglected background often exhibit poor self-esteem, because when they were little, their needs were not met, so they cried, and it did not influence the people around them. So here, they didn't have that self-awareness. Well, if I don't have the power to impact other people, I must not be worth as much. And then once you're worth something, well, that's where self-control comes in. Because you know what? I'm better than that. I'm worthwhile. And if I'm worthwhile, then it's worth it for me to work on myself. And then I can regulate my emotions or tolerate frustrations or push something off for later because I am more powerful. Now we're going to go on to the next slide, but I want to answer the question that I have here. Somebody wants to know if confidence and self-esteem is synonymous. It's a good question, and the truth of the matter is that confidence is more of a term that people use in general, and it means like she's confident, she presents herself well. Self-esteem, we do use it synonymously, but really self-esteem is the way I explained it before, which is only one of those four. It's really valuing yourself. So a person can have a healthy self-esteem and also still not be confident in certain areas. I hope that answered that question. If it's still unclear, please feel free to type that in the box. Children understand well before they speak is definitely 100% true. And if they don't, then we know we have a problem. Now, what are some signs of healthy self-esteem? So now we're going to take a quiz. I'm going to read these 7 signs of healthy self-esteem, and I want everyone to take it themselves and just think in their mind if it's check or X, yes or no. And if you get more than 5 out of 7 correct, so that's 5 or more, if you get 5, 6, or 7 correct, at least 80% of the time, then I want you to put a check next to your name. So let's read the first one. Can accept criticism and compliments. So if 80% of the time you can accept criticism and compliments, give yourself a check. If you're the type of person that can't accept criticism or compliments, so don't. I do find that it's sometimes easier to accept criticism than even compliments. The next one is, can you take initiative? Can you start a project? Can you come up with an idea? Can you say something? And again, give yourself a check or an X. Can you laugh when you make a mistake? Not all the time. Depends what the mistake is. Yesterday I was walking around the lake with my kids and I dropped my van keys and I had to walk all around the second time. There was not that much laughing at that moment. Can you make a decision? Right? How many people have such a hard time making a decision? Can you state an opinion? Now the hardest one, can you forgive yourself? Can you forgive other people? Do you generally feel comfortable in social situations? Now, if you got 5 out of 7 of these as a check, then you can put a check up here. And I see that we do have some checks. And that's considered a pretty healthy sense of self. Could we still work on it and grow in certain areas? For sure. We said before, Self-esteem is not something that stays the same. It's a growing skill. But this is the checklist this is a summary of a checklist. Now let's go on to the next slide. And this slide is going to answer the why here, why now. Like, why is self-esteem so important? Specifically, we said Hidden Sparks is more educational. We want a child to succeed in school. So why do we really care so much about the sense of self? Now, here I would actually love to know if everyone's very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then I can go through it faster. So if you're familiar, if you could just put that little hand next to your name, that way I'll know that most of us are familiar and we can go faster. So this means click on that little hand. And if I see a lot of hands, okay, good. I see a couple of hands, so I'm just going to go through it fast. But the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that it's a pyramid, and in order to get to the top, we have to do the bottom. Now, the bottom level, our basic motivation for everything is physiological, which is just food, water, sleep, very, very basic, our homeostasis needs. Now, we need to have that first, and that comes before anything else, which is why if you have a child who's starving, he's not going to care what his friends think about him. He's not going to care about, getting in danger. He'll risk his life in order to have food. You have all those examples of the children of the Holocaust who used to run and try to sneak food and scraps even though they could be killed, because food comes first. That's our basic instinct. Once that need is met, then we can worry about our safety. Then we can worry about our love and belonging. And then we have self-esteem. So notice how high up self-esteem is. Often, if you're in a classroom and you have a bunch of students in front of you and you see some of them that have such a poor sense of self, very often it could be, especially when they're younger, that some of their basic levels are not being met. And because of that, they can't even go there. They can't even think about valuing themselves because they have to worry about, well, am I loved? Do I belong? Am I safe? Are my physical needs being met? And only then can I think about valuing myself. But then why is self-esteem so important if it's high up there? Because the one that's right above is self-actualization. And self-actualization is learning. It's fulfilling our potential. So if we don't value ourselves, how can we self-actualize? How can we fulfill our potential? And even though it's written like this as a pyramid, it's really the top two in my head are constantly flipping and revolving and circling into each other. Because the more I value myself, the more my potential gets raised, the more I fulfill my potential, and then guess what? I value myself more. But once I value myself more, my potential raises again. Think in your head of somebody who you view as very successful in life. And when you have that person in your head, now it could be someone you know personally, it could just be someone that you've heard of. But now when you think of that person, think of this question. Did they stop when they reached their goal, or were they constantly creating new goals? And you can answer this also with a check or an X. If you feel that they were constantly creating new goals, then put a check. Now, all the people that are very successful are constantly creating new goals, because in order to feel good, I have to feel that I'm accomplishing. Once I accomplish, I feel good, but then guess what? I want to accomplish even more. Now, in the next slide, I did a small quiz to test us on the needs of which ones they are. But since I'm assuming that the majority of us are familiar with this, I'm just going to choose 2 or 3 to go through. I'm going to choose 3. It says, I hope I won't get fired for that mistake. If you think that that is an esteem need, then give me a check. If you think it's a different need, then give me an X. Okay, good. Anyone who thinks it's a different need, I would love for you to type it in the box so I can see which one you think it is. But the reason why I chose that one is because the truth is that could be so many different ones. I hope I won't get fired for that mistake. It could be esteem, because it could be that I hope my value of who I am will retain itself regardless of the mistake. It can definitely be belonging and social need. I see, like Kira wrote down, it can definitely be safety, or maybe I need that job. It could even be that physiological, because maybe I need that job for my food. So you do have that idea where they definitely can overlap. What about number 9? I know I can be promoted. That's also a tricky one. If you feel that that's something besides for esteem, then again, give me an X. And if you can write me down your ideas. I know I can be promoted. Well, what is that? If I want to be promoted because that means I'm worth something, well, that's esteem. Promotion is a proof to my value, and very often it is, which is why the research shows in industrial psychology that more important than giving a big raise is giving a lot of positive reinforcement or small raises more often, because it's not always about that bottom line, about the dollars and cents. We think it is. We say, oh, I'm not appreciated because they're not paying me what I'm worth. But it's not really about that. It's about feeling good. And we feel good when someone shows their appreciation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be grand, but it does have to be frequent. Now let's go on to the next slide. Now this is the easy one. Why is self-esteem important? So here I listed some of the positive benefits of self-esteem. I find that it's very important for us as parents and as teachers who have such a role and such a power in a child's life to understand the value of self-esteem, so that we think twice and we bite our lips before saying something that can ruin a child's self-esteem. But I also like to have the research on hand when I'm working with someone a little bit older, like a preteen or a teenager or a young adult, because then I'm more direct. And then I say, I feel like you don't value yourself for who you are. You don't recognize your strengths. If you would build up on your confidence, and here I use the word confidence because I just feel it has less of a clinical connotation, but I really mean this whole idea of self-esteem, I feel like you can go much further in life. And they'll say, nah, I don't need it. And then I'll say, you know what? I printed out this article. Do me a favor, read it. And then if you want to work on it, great. I'm here with you. We could work on it. And if not, not. So when they read these articles, and these are a million of them, I'm happy to send links, but really if you just Google it, you'll find a lot of your own where it shows all this research, how people literally live longer, how they have a happier lives, how they end up making more money, they're more successful. Then they say, you know what, it is a worthwhile goal. So some people think self-esteem is only a goal within, not within of itself, but really it's a goal within of itself, because automatically, once we have a greater sense of self, we will accomplish more. In the next slide, we talk about self-esteem in a social context. It's always so sad when you have a child who is the apple of his parents' eye and could do no wrong and is so happy until he goes to school. And then all of a sudden he goes to school and you just see this difference in this child. And it could be because the learning is harder. It could be because the peer pressure is harder. It could be because one child has decided to pick on this child. There are so many factors, and as much as we as parents want to protect our children, it's not always within our power. So we have to understand that there is that correlation, and it's the connection between worth, competence, and control. Once they go to school, they now measure themselves in terms of other people. And they say, my mother always said I'm an artist, but look at her picture. Her picture is so much nicer than mine. Which, of course, lends itself, if we want to preempt this, then you know what? We should not be telling our children that they are artists when they are not artists. We should be telling them good, accurate information. I always ask parents, when I'm trying to get them to understand this concept, I say, if somebody tells you you're amazing, you're brilliant, you're an artist, you're so talented, do you feel good? Is that what really makes you feel good? and I'll have all of you answer for me. Does that make you feel good when somebody sits there and tells you wonderful things about you? Does it make you feel good? If it makes you feel good, give yourself a check. I see some checks. I don't know if they're there from before. And I feel like, yeah, maybe it can make us feel a little bit good. Everyone likes to get compliments. Compliments are great. But then I ask them, now what makes you feel better? When somebody tells you you're amazing, you're wonderful, or when you really are amazing or wonderful? If somebody tells me, I am so calm and I never lose my voice, you're such a good mother, you're so calm, you never lose your voice, and I really know that I'm not so calm and I'm only so calm in front of them, does their compliment make me feel good? If anything, it can have the adverse effect. Well, here you think I'm like this, and that's why you think I'm wonderful, but really I know I'm not like this, which means that I must not be wonderful. So it's not about compliments. It's about competence. It's when we're doing. I feel good when I know I'm good. I feel smart when I am smart. I don't feel smart when you tell me I'm smart. I feel smart when I am smart. And that is our job as the prominent adults in a child's life, is to help them develop their area of competence. Rick Lavoie quotes Dr. Mel Brooks, and he uses a term called island of competence, which I think is a wonderful term, because island of competence means if you have your area of success, something that you are good at, and you expand it and you build upon it, then you are safe in terms of self-esteem, because even when you struggle in other areas, you will be able to fall back on that. You'll be able to say, but you know what? I am the person who makes everyone feel good, or I am the person who can always put people in a good mood, or I am the person who people always rush to speak to because I'm a good listener. So I might not be the life of the party, and I might turn red when my teacher calls on me in class, but I am a loyal friend. And that's our job, because they don't know their island of competence. And when they look at everyone else, they might think that they don't have an island of competence. But we know that they do, because every single person is valuable. And sometimes it's harder to see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So that's our job, to try to help them build and develop this island of competence. I remember his example that he gives, Rick Lavoie, is that he talks about a kid who's just so unsuccessful, and he says, but the one thing he's good at is that he is good at tightening screws. So he says, your job as parents is to go home every single day and loosen every single screw in the house. So when he comes home, you can say, oh, couldn't wait for you to come home because all those screws are loose and nobody tightens the screws the way you do. And I find that in today's day and age, when culturally there's so much more out there, there's so many ways that we can find that island of competence. We had a girl in 7th grade who was so unsuccessful in so many areas, but you know what? She was great with computers. So we put her in charge of the PowerPoints for the class, and we made it into this huge job. Now, mind you, there never was a PowerPoint president before. This was a new job that we have created for her, but it was great. The whole class benefited. What was her job? Before every test, she had to create a review using PowerPoints and show it to the class. The class loved it. They were enamored by it. They were thanking her. They were calling her the night before. Could you stick in this in the review? Could you use this in that review? And all of a sudden, you took this quiet introvert girl, and now she felt like $1 million because we have discovered her island of competence. Now, we didn't put her right into it without training. We actually sent her for 2 private computer lessons once we saw this was a strength. And this, I think, is also important. We used to think years ago, when I was in school, I remember that if somebody was good in reading and needed help in math, they were pulled out for reading and given extra math. And now, if we're going to go based on this idea, we're going to say the opposite. You're good at reading, we're going to give you extra reading. Your math is going to be reading-based. We're going to focus on your strength, and we're going to build up your area of strength. And control is the idea of an internal locus of control or an external locus of control, which means how do we view the world? Do we view the world as I am in control of my destiny, I can change certain things, or that's the way life is. The popular kids will always be popular, the A students will always be the A students, and we want to cultivate in our children an internal locus of control. And that is the truth. The truth is we are in charge of our own destiny to a certain extent. To a certain extent, our life is what we make of our life. And if we believe in that, we will make more of our life. So we need to believe and we need to train them that everyone can make a difference, that everyone is important. And it goes without saying that the only way to teach this is to show it, is to believe it. Because if I'm going to walk around and tell you, oh, everyone's important and everyone can make a difference, but I don't view myself as being important and I don't view myself that I can make a difference, then guess what? These kids are not buying it. They have to know that you believe it. You believe it in them and you believe it in you. And that's why any of these amazing programs where they have any of them, they had, someone just told me, a teacher just called me from an out-of-town school. She told me she had her class of third-grade boys write letters to Israeli soldiers. She said the way that they stood stronger, the day after they wrote it, because it was like, wow, I made a difference in a big soldier's life. First of all, what's more exciting for a third-grade boy than a soldier altogether? But now you have this, and of course this teacher knew how to present it. These soldiers are lonely, and you have the power of making them feel good. And if they feel good, they're going to fight more, and they're going to be better, and they're going to be happier, and their whole life is going to be different, and Israel will be defended better, all because of your letter. And there's definitely truth to it. The soldiers always appreciate the letters. She wasn't making up a story. Making up a story would never help. These students are very smart, and they wrote those letters where they felt, wow, I can make a difference, and then that made them feel better about themselves. The
Mindy,
yes.
Mindy, I wanted to bring up, Renee brought up an interesting point, and I know you're going to address it throughout, so you can, see where you want to address it more, that there's this, the balance between, let's say, cultivating a self-efficacy and a confidence that's kind of internal, balanced with giving those kind of the praise and compliments, genuine compliments, and I guess how to balance those two, or how to weigh where you put your emphasis as a parent.
You're saying praise and compliment as opposed to what?
So let's say, for example, building up a child's competence.
Oh, competence as opposed to...
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so you know what? Well, even though we don't have it written here, let's do that as the first one. When we talk about how, what are some practical methods for increasing self-esteem? So we'll add in a first one, which is Renee's question, and we will call it encouragement versus praise. And that will be our first one. And our first one is yes. It's exactly what you said, Renee. It's that positive reinforcement. What I mean by moving away from praise, it's moving away from the superfluous, fluffy, extraneous praise that's not accurate and not meaningful. You're amazing, you're super is not accurate and not meaningful. Now, we have two different things, because self-efficacy and competence, but we also still have that self-worth, and they constantly feed into each other. And we also still have that self-concept. If my self-concept remains the same today as it was when I was 6 months old, I am in seriously terrible shape. As we get older, we have to constantly be developing more of it, and it all goes hand in hand, which means if we want to build up our child's sense of self, we could do it in all the areas. So we could start even with that self-concept, letting them develop things about themselves. Well, what do you like to do? Well, what are you good at? I noticed that you ripstick all down the block so fast. You have a good sense of balance. Even pointing out these things to them, which is not a compliment, it's a fact. It's not a compliment, it's not praise, it's not, oh my gosh, you are the best superstar skater in the world. You're just stating things about them that maybe they have never verbalized to themselves. That means you're developing their self-concept, and we know they all feed into each other. Now, positive reinforcement, 100%. Praise is wonderful. I just like for it to be accurate and not overdone, because if we're going to state a fact, if I'm going to tell a child, let's say, I noticed that before Malka was crying, and you went over to her, I'm giving my example today from supper, and you went over to her and you gave her a piece of your dessert because that's why she was upset. I noticed that you really made her feel good. And that's exactly what I said. I didn't say, oh my gosh, that's so amazing and I'm so proud of you, even though I was thinking that. Why didn't I say that? Because I said, here, what I'm doing for her is I'm pointing out a fact that she knows is true. And now her brain is forced to make that connection of, if I did that, that must mean that I am a kind and caring person. And if she could come up to that conclusion on her own, it is so much more powerful than if I do it. On the other hand, there are many times where I tell this, specific daughter, you are a sunshine. You are always making people feel good. That is something so special about you. Now, yes, she struggles to read, and that's something that's so hard for her. That's all part of who she is. Yes, you struggle to read, but on the other hand, you are the girl who notices when people are upset, time in and time out, and make them feel good. Both of them are facts. Does that answer the question at all, Renee? Okay. So if you think of a different question on it, please feel free, to ask or to add. Or after, when we open up the line to questions, we could, discuss a dialogue of it. The next idea is the idea of being your own best friend. And there are many different ways of teaching this and explaining it, but it's the idea that we judge ourselves and we speak to ourselves with a much stricter ruler than we do to other people. So the experiment that I'll do is that I'll give sentences to kids, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to ask, I'll say, pretend that I'm a girl in your class. Now I'm going to say a few different things, and after I say each one, I just want you to respond to me. And I'll say some sort of general negative statement, like, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so stupid, I'm such a horrible sister, I always fight with my sister, right? And I'll say things like this. And in a second, their automatic response is, no, it's not true, you're so pretty, so fine now, you gained a little bit of weight, but you'll lose it, don't worry. It's so much easier for us to judge favorably somebody else. Notice the positive in somebody else. So I tell them, if I could teach you one thing, if I could teach you to love yourself the way you love other people, to be your own best friend, automatically you'll view yourself in a more positive light. Because when your best friend messes up, you tell her, you're such a loser, I never want to see you again, what's wrong with you? But when you mess up, what's your inner critic saying? Now, this is a concept that can be escalated or brought down depending on the child's level. Our second one is read. I just saw another question over here. Let's see. Just curious, do you recommend positive reinforcement for things that are the child's responsibility? Hooray, you did your homework. Hooray, you cleaned your room. Hooray, you did well on a test. That's a good question. The question is, do we believe in a lot of praise for what a child should be doing anyhow? So, this I'm assuming is really an opinion question. I'm sure people will disagree with me. I don't. I'm not into going all overboard for somebody doing what they're supposed to be doing. However, I do try to find something where it's a little bit harder for them or something that I liked about it that was a step extra, and I focus on that. Now, the reality of positive reinforcement, and I'm a big believer in that, right? I'm a BCBA, that's my training, is that really what we reinforce does get better. However, we do have that concept that when there is intrinsic motivation and then we add extrinsic, the intrinsic goes down. So the example would be, let's say, a child who likes to read. And I say, well, you like to read? Oh my gosh, every book that you read, I'm going to give you $1. All of a sudden, you find that child reading less because it just became kind of a chore instead of something that I like to do on my own. So if I have a child who does their homework beautifully every night, I will praise them for it, but not the homework part. I'll say more like, wow, I love how you're so responsible. You just do things that you're supposed to do, like you do your homework on your own, like you clean up so many times, because instead of me making it like a praise, I'm again making it more like a self-concept. You're a responsible person. But on the other hand, if I have a different child who never does homework, so then when they do homework, I'll say hooray and I'll sing a whole dance. I'll do whatever I have to do because great, this child did homework. Incidentally, I don't put such a big emphasis on homework altogether. I feel like as parents, we have so much of our own struggles with the child. in a way, let homework be the school's struggle. So you didn't do your homework, so whatever your teacher's penalty is, you have to do it during recess. Okay. When they come to a certain age, I feel like, so you do it how you want. Does that answer your question, Renee?
I think that was from Kira. I think you got it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Our next one is redefining our self-image. Everybody has a self-image. It's the way we view ourselves. It's when we're brutally honest with ourselves. What do we think about ourselves? We think, well, we're good people, but we mess up sometimes. Or we're basically good people, but, we should really work on our lying or our anger or whatever it is. That's our self-image. And the goal really is to redefine the self-image to a way that works. And the way it works is that overall, I am a good person. Now, sometimes you're coming into play in middle of the game. And this could be for whatever reason. This could be that a child, I just heard a devastating story of a child that was really, really abused on so many levels for 2 years until it came to anyone's attention. So then you have to, this is like a shattered individual that you have to build up from scratch. So you're coming in the middle of the game. So you have to redefine that self-image. How are you going to redefine it? And how do you want them to view it? So you need to start off from the basic, original, initial premise, which is by the fact that you are alive, by the fact that God chose you as worthy of Him creating you, you have an intrinsic value. No matter what people did to you, no matter what you did to other people, you are, your essence is good, valuable, holy, pure, whichever word you want to use, but the idea is that you have a value that can never be taken away. No matter how terrible things are, that value is there. And that's the first thing you have to teach them. You have to show them. You have to prove to them. And then you have to say, well, if that's your core, that you're inherently valuable, so now how are you going to view yourself? Well, I'm a person who. And you want that first I'm a person who should always be positive. You could have the buts, you could have the ands. I should work on this. I'm a little bit too quiet. I'm a little bit too noisy. I wish I was more quiet. I wish I was more studious. I wish I was smart. All of that is fine. But inherently, your basis of who you are, that self-image, has to be coming from a place of strength and from a place of positivity. So now if we go back again to that cycle, to those circles that went into each other, well, if we don't have a self-concept, then we can't have a self-image. And you'd be surprised how many teenagers struggle with this, because this is when they're forming identities of who I am, right? We know Eric Erickson. That's the stage when it's all about who I am. Well, I don't know who I am. And I'll say, well, tell me what you're about. And they'll have no clue. And then what your job is to break it down for them with very specific, detail-oriented questions. Questions like, what do you like to do? What makes you feel good? What type of books do you like to read? What type of movies do you like to watch? What do you like to do in your spare time? What's your favorite activity in camp? And there's so many different questionnaires you can give them, or you can come up with your own. But the idea is you ask them these questions, they start thinking. And I'll start with basic. I'll say, what do you like to eat? What's your favorite food? And I'll have kids who say, I don't even know. My whole class is eating salad, so I'm eating salads. But I don't really know if I like salad. I don't really know if anyone likes salad. It's just what we do. But it's that type of idea. What do I like? What do I not like? What makes me feel good? What makes me feel bad? And as I get to know myself, I end up doing better, accomplishing, and thinking better thoughts about myself. So after redefining self-image, then we have developing an optimistic explanatory style. Now that in simple English really means becoming positive, right? Becoming an optimist. Martin Seligman speaks about an explanatory style, and he explains how optimists, they take a positive event, they internalize it, and they generalize it. So I get 100 on my test, I say, wow, I am great at math. I am smart. A pessimist, on the other hand, takes that positive event and they externalize it, and they make it very specific, and they say, oh, it was an easy test. So they're not taking the credit, and they're not spreading it further. And then the opposite in terms of something negative. We want to train them to have an optimistic explanatory style. Now, realistic We don't want anybody living in a world that's not true. But realistically, if you got a 100 on the test, that means you are good at math. You always get 100. That's okay. It's okay to know that. And it's true, you're not good at history. That's also okay. But that just means you're not good at history. It doesn't mean you're not smart. And I find that with academics in today's day and age, it's not as significant in terms of their self-esteem as other things are. But I find that somebody who's not good with kids, for a girl, in today's day and age within our culture, struggles a lot with their sense of self. And they'll tell me, no, I must be a horrible person because I'm not good with kids. You could see how that could mess a person up. My mother stays home the whole day and she watches kids and she's great with kids. Well, I'm already 13 and I don't enjoy little kids. So what's going to be? How am I going to be a mother? And if I feel like I'm not going to be a good mother, so what type of person am I? And then you have to go through it with them. And how, just because you don't have patience to read stories to your kids all day doesn't mean you won't be a wonderful mother and doesn't mean you won't be a wonderful person. And there are different parts of being a good mother. You don't have to be what we call a baby person, love babies all the time. And this is with whatever area is holding them back. You have to decide if it's something that they really need for their definition. So then you have to show them the inaccuracies of it, of how it's not true. If it's something that's not important, so then you isolate it. So with math, I'm forever telling people, so you're not good at math, who cares? And I tell them, I got 100 in my math region. So I'm not saying this because I'm not good at math. I'm saying this because it will never impact your life. They'll take out your phone. Your phone is a calculator. It doesn't make a difference to your future if you're not good at math. Next, we have giving therapy. Giving therapy is hands down the best things we can do for our children, starting from as young as 2 years old, which is having them give to other people. When we give to other people, we feel worthwhile. We feel like $1 million. We are created with that desire in us that we want to give to other people, because guess what? If I give to you, that means that I'm valuable because I have that power to give to other people. And children from very young could give to other people. They could share. They could smile. They could play with you. They could do anything in order to give. And as they get older, then I like to have them involved in any of these volunteer organizations. They can stuff envelopes. They can answer the phone. They can write letters. They can visit the elderly. Any kind of giving to other people, we see makes a huge difference. I remember one girl that we started working with, and it was the beginning of the year, and between all the holidays, we really did not end up getting a lot of work done. The one thing we did is that right when we started is that I set her up with the Special Children's Center here in Lakewood, and she went as a volunteer. And I remember we had a meeting with the school, the teachers, we had a follow-up meeting like November time, and they could not get over this girl. They said, this is a girl who was so slouched and so bent over, and you literally saw a difference in her confidence physically, and they were giving me all these compliments. And speaking about the difference between compliments and competence, I knew it was not me. I saw the girl maybe twice. So I said, it's not me. It's because we put her in Special Children's Center, and she was able to give to other people. And this is what we need. We need to put them in positions where they can give to other people because they will feel better about themselves. Kyra, I see your suggestion. I will definitely do that for next time. Thank you. Next, we have environmental supports. Environmental supports, and this is, again, where we as the adults have a real important responsibility, and that means, who is going to be in their environment? Where are we putting them with? You want them to feel good about themselves? You have to protect them in that way and make sure that they are in an environment that supports them. If you are going to have a bus driver that is verbally abusive to your son every single day, then guess what? You should drive that son to school, whatever it means, because you can't put him in that position or call the bus company and fight for him. It is our job to protect our children. And very often when parents talk to me about a child that's getting bullied, and I'm sure you all know this and will agree with me, it's not a kid in the class. They tell me he gets bullied by his brother. She gets bullied by her sister. And it happens so often. And sometimes it happens in a subtle way where you don't even know. And the older sister is considered the beautiful, nice queen bee. But behind the curtains, she's so malicious to that younger sister. And that's where you have to get involved. If you want them to retain their sense of self, they have to be in that positive environment. Next, we have dress the part. If we look good, if we feel good, if we stand tall, if we take care of ourselves, we say fake it till we make it. Make sure they have a good haircut. Make sure they practice standing straight, speaking with clarity. And of course, we have that self-care. If they're not going to eat healthy, if they're not going to get enough food, enough sleep, enough exercise, it's hard to feel good about yourself. There's always that correlation between the physical health and the mental health. We want to encourage mistakes. I just paid a girl to write down the wrong answer on purpose. I said, if you write down the wrong answer, I will give you $2 for every answer you write down wrong. And I just paid her $10. Now, this was after 6 months. She couldn't do it. She physically could not write down the wrong answer. Why? Because what does that show about me if I get an answer wrong on a test? Now, before I get all the backlash of why I'm telling somebody to write an answer wrong on purpose, I'm going to explain to you that this was a child who had such anxiety because her whole sense of self was wrapped up around being perfect. And being perfect is not a realistic goal. Being perfect is a fallacy. It's impossible. So if I only think I'm worthwhile if I'm perfect, then guess what? I will not think that I'm worthwhile. So I have to understand that I am worthwhile with my mistakes. Let's go to the next slide. Become a positive thinker. Just some ways of training them to become a positive thinker. You need to train them to notice the positive. Every situation has positive and negative. Notice the positive, either by looking at the whole picture, or you could say, well, at least I always have my story, and I always like to tell them true stories. So I had my story when I was meeting with a mother, and I was walking in front of her, and she was walking behind me, which since then I always walk them in and I walk behind them, and my skirt just fell down on the floor. And I tell this, to my teenage clients, and they're like, your skirt fell down to the floor, you weren't dying, you weren't mortified. I said, of course I was mortified, but I kept saying, at least I'm wearing tights. At least I'm wearing tights. At least it was just a mother, not a mother and a father. There are a lot of at least. And then I tell them the silver lining. I was able to say, now I have a great story to talk about when I do positive thinking. A lot of it is about focus. A lot of it is about where we put the emphasis. Do we put the emphasis on our strengths, or do we put the emphasis on our struggles? How do we think? How do we think about what's going on? Do we have that positive way of thought? Do we have that negative? How do we think about other people? How do we talk? Do we talk positive? Do we talk negative? And this could be self-talk or real talk. Judge yourself favorably. You can tell yourself, well, I made a mistake, so I messed up. I won't do it again, instead of beating yourself up about it. Accept compliments graciously. This is so hard for so many people, adults and children. Someone gives you a compliment, why do you feel the need to say, no, it's not true? No, I really am fat. Thank you, and move on. Accept compliments graciously. Now, our next 3 slides are some samples of funny pictures that I like to show when I'm working on this idea of being positive, B+, being positive, and finding the silver lining. And I show them a picture like this, and I say, look at this little boy. He worked so hard on his homework, and now the dog ate his homework. What's something positive that he could think? And I get a lot of fun ideas. Ideas like, well, at least he finally has a good excuse for his homework, or, he probably got some answers wrong anyhow, or at least his dog won't be, hungry, or anything like that. The next picture is a picture of the Good Samaritan trying to, stop the hose. And you could also tell a lot about a person with how they answer this question. When I ask a teenager this question, I asked her, I said, well, what could you tell him? Like, look at him, how he's trying to help, and look what happened to him. And right away she said, at least his friends are not watching. For that teenage image where everyone's looking at you and everyone's watching, at least no one sees. And we have that last one with the boy and his bike up in a tree. And that's, at least his bike is with him. The next slide is an acronym that I call SMILE, and I give this out to parents to remind themselves of what they could do in order to build the self-esteem of their child. So SMILE, you have the S, is for show interest in their life and daily activities. Because you know what? I could say I love you and you're important to me. But if I come over to you when you're coloring and I could say, oh, I love the way you use that blue marker. Or I could come over to you and you're building with the clicks and I could say, what are you building? Oh, that's so interesting. So I'm not complimenting, I'm not praising. I'm taking a genuine interest in what they're doing. The message to them is, I must be valuable. I must be important because my mother wants to know. So if she wants to know, that means I must be important. Mentioning is strengthening. Whatever we talk about, that becomes who the person is. I have one daughter who is very rigid, very not flexible. For a long time, we worked on her becoming flexible. And every time she was flexible, we would go, I talking about the on and on, amazing, you're so flexible, you're so flexible. I would say at this point, she is probably from my more flexible children because she views herself as being flexible. It's not her nature. You know it's not her nature because she does take life more seriously, but she could give in. There's a change of plans. She could go with it because every time she's flexible, we talk about it. We make a big deal. And every time she's not, we kind of overlook it. And this is also very important in terms of training a child to have a positive outlook. If you have a child who comes home every day and he complains and he grumbles and the kids are mean to me and school is hard and we want to be good parents, so we want to validate and sympathize, we have to be careful that we're not falling into that rut of mentioning and strengthening. Well, if you're going to make a big deal about it and you're going to say, and that's what happened and the teacher did that, well, then subconsciously your child is going to be looking for the negative to share with you because that's how he got the rise out of you. That's how he got the emphasis, the power, the attention. So 100% listen, but I always say don't put the enthusiasm there. Instead, just be like, oh, yeah, I see, it was hard. You're listening, you're validating without the enthusiasm. But anything your child says positive or neutral, oh, lunch today wasn't so bad. Oh, we had outdoor recess. That's when I would tell you to have a greater emphasis. And how do we have a greater emphasis? With questions. So instead of saying, wow, that's amazing, that's just when I'll ask a million questions. Oh, you had a good lunch? What was lunch? Oh, it was bread? Was bread with cream cheese, bread without cream cheese? Did anybody bring their own lunch? Oh, was there hot lunch? Was there cold lunch? Did your class get lunch first? Did your class get lunch second? And I'll just ask a lot of questions, and then my child will know, oh, this is something that's important to her. Lunch is important to her, as opposed to when kids are not nice to me, Invite them into your world. Obviously, you want this to be age appropriate. You don't want to share with them details that's not appropriate for their age. But if you tell them small things like, oh, today I went to buy paper goods for the party, and even ask them advice, like which paper goods should I use? Or I'm making this party next week. I was thinking about making that chocolate, that chocolate pudding cake for dessert that we had last week. Or I was thinking about making the sorbet that we had the week before. Which one do you think I should make? And then actually taking their advice. That tells them 1,000 times more than you telling them you're so important to me and you're so valuable is something like that. I asked your advice and I used your advice. What greater proof is there that I value your opinion? And there are so many ways we could do this where it doesn't really make a difference to us which paper goods we use. Sometimes I'll say go out and buy two types when you don't care either way. Just so that you could tell your daughter, you have such a good eye for color. Which ones should we use? And have her choose. And then that whole night when you're using those beautiful paper goods, you could say, well, yeah, Shani was the one who chose them. She has a great eye for color. Legitimize their emotions. On the other hand, you want to make sure that when a child feels a certain way, even if you wouldn't feel that way based on that. So if their toy broke and therefore they're devastated, you don't want to say it's only a toy. You want to say, oh, wow, that must really be devastating that you worked so hard on the toy and therefore it broke. Expect them to succeed. And this is the part that I have parents telling me, what's the difference if in my mind I think they'll never be successful or not? Why do I have to expect them to succeed? I'll tell them, and here I'm going to tell you, no matter how learning disabled your child is, they are brilliant when it comes to knowing what you really think about them. And I see this time and time again, where I'll have a kid saying, well, why should I bother being good? My Rebbe hates me anyhow, and he thinks that I am whatever. And when I will speak to the Rebbe will say, he is whatever. And he will use the exact same term. Whatever it is, he's a shlamazel, he's flying, he'll never be successful, he's annoying, he's a troublemaker, and the kids know it. So you need to expect them to succeed. And in order to do that, you have to do everything that we spoke about already before. You have to focus on the positive. You have to think positive. You have to change your mindset. Expect them to succeed. Be patient with their shortcomings. Focus on their strengths as opposed to their weaknesses. I saw that somebody asked for another copy of this slide. The next slide is actually a checklist that I use, that I give them out where they can actually check it every day if they want. Did I show interest? Did I mention positive? Did I invite them in? And I do have a blank sheet of these checklists that I have, and here I have Post-it notes, that you could always print them out as Post-it notes, but I do just have blank sheets that you can cut out and check for yourself to see how well you did with this. And I'm happy to send that to you afterwards, and you can have it. Another idea that I got from a parent is that she told me that this checklist was great, but it was too much. It was too many things, and she'd rather work on one thing at a time. So she chose to work on showed interest in, and instead of her using my checklist, she took blank Post-it notes and she put 5 of them throughout her house. And she said every day when she saw that blank Post-it note, whether it was hot pink or green or whatever it is, she would say, this reminded me I have to show interest. So she would be upstairs in her laundry room. She would see this hot pink. She would run downstairs, find her son building the clicks, and say, oh, wow, I love the way you're building the clicks. What are you making today? What did you make yesterday? You're making it ready for a long time? And then she would go back up and finish her laundry. So that was also a very nice idea. I see that we are running out of time, and I apologize. I usually try to time myself better. So, Sarah, you tell me what you want me to do. Do you want me to go to the last slide, or should I leave it for now? Hello?
Yeah, hi, sorry. No, I would let's keep going. We have a few more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so the last slide. Our last slide is we want to avoid the pitfalls. What are the pitfalls for a healthy sense of self? What ruins it for us? And here are the most popular ones: that all or nothing thinking, that perfectionist tendency. I'll walk into my house and I'll see that I didn't wash dishes in the sink, right? And I'll say, oh, my house is such a mess. I'm such a slob. That's an all or nothing thinking. Why can't I say my house is clean, my floor is swept? Yes, I didn't wash the dishes, but I did everything else. So that's that all or nothing that we have to break out of it, and we have to break that out of our children. They also have an all or nothing. Well, if I'm not valedictorian, if I'm not GO, then I'm nothing. No, everyone could contribute. And if you got an 80, that's not a nothing. That's an 80. You know 80% of the material. So you want to use hopeful statements. Well, you know what? Today I cleaned the laundry room. Hopefully tomorrow I'll get to the laundry room and to my bedroom. Or today I made my bed. Hopefully tomorrow I'll also make my husband's bed. Another pitfall that we have is that mental filtering. At night, before we go to sleep, what we think about ends up being the negative parts, our mistakes, and we filter out the positive. Why? Why, if you had a wonderful day where you made 100 people feel good, where you accomplished, where you worked, at night, before you fall asleep, are you thinking, I cannot believe I yelled at that child again. I told myself I'm not going to get drawn in, and here I got drawn in and I yelled at him. I cannot believe it, I'm such a loser. Or I can't believe I put my foot in my mouth. Or I can't believe I burnt that supper. Or why didn't I call that person back? I called 4 other people back. So that mental filtering is something that we have to train to switch around the other way. Don't filter out the positive. Now, I'm not saying you have to filter out the negative, but don't filter out the positive. Forgive yourself. It's true. I messed up. I shouldn't have said that, right? I should not have asked her about if her baby's walking yet. I should have remembered that her baby, or I should have guessed that maybe her baby was born with a disability and therefore most likely he's not walking. It's true. I messed up. But you know what? How should I have known? At least I fixed it afterwards, or at least I made other people feel good throughout the day. Converting positives into negatives. This I see all the time. What's converting positives into negatives? I take the strengths, I take what I did well, and instead of me saying, wow, and you'll hear this from your kid, instead of the kid saying, wow, I got 100 on my spelling test, they'll say, all the other tests I didn't do well in. Or, yes, I got a nice mark on my report card here, but look at my other marks. That you take the positive and you convert it into a negative because you point out how it's different from everything else. So instead of me saying, wow, I'm so proud of myself that I cleaned my laundry room, I'm saying, my whole house is a mess except for the laundry room. Don't do that. Focus on the positive. The positive is good. I always give the example with the diets. Instead of beating yourself up for eating 10 pieces of chocolate, tell yourself, I also ate the vegetables. I also drank the water. I could have easily eaten 20 pieces of chocolate. Avoid the should and the must statements. When we tell ourselves, I should have done this or I must do this, you're setting yourself up for failure. Don't say should or must. Just talk about what you're doing and what you did. There's no should or must. Don't jump to negative conclusions, right? Don't say, I'm such a klutz because I spilled water today. That's jumping to negative conclusions. Just state it as it is. I spilled the water today. Focus on the positive. At least it was only the water. I'm such a bad mother, I yelled at my kids. That's negative conclusions. State the facts. The facts are usually not as bad. The fact is, I yelled today once. Trust me, if you would have seen what he was doing, I could have yelled 30 times. Don't mistake feelings for facts. I feel so stupid. I feel like such a loser. I feel like I have no friends. Relabel that negative thought into a question. Am I really stupid? I messed up. It's true. I messed up. Am I really stupid? Am I really mean? Am I really a liar? Am I really a terrible mother? Whatever it is, question it. Don't just allow your mind to give you those negative thoughts. Now, the problem, it's like I always say, our biggest strength is our biggest weaknesses. Our biggest gifts are our biggest not gifts, right? Our biggest punishments. And one of them is that idea of habit. That once something becomes a habit, our brain is wired a certain way. And that negative thinking can become a habit where it's wired a certain way, and we have to stop it. And we have to stop it in ourselves, and we have to stop it in our children. But once we stop it, once we train them to challenge that negative thought, that when they drop something, instead of them saying, I'm such a klutz, or I'm such a loser, they laugh, or they say, Gam Zula Tova, or whatever you're going to train them in a positive way, or at least it was only this, or at least I didn't break myself. That was a line that I used when my kids were little and they would break something. I would say, at least you didn't break your head. So you're focusing on the positive. Yeah, you broke the vase. Yeah, you broke this. You didn't break your head. That's the most important thing. Where did I even get that from? I don't know. Relabeling the negative thoughts. Labeling is disabling. You don't want that. You don't want them to label themselves. The self put downs. The I always do this. Don't do that. Give yourself partial credit. Focus on the positive, even if it is small. And as we said before, you mentioned you strengthen, so that partial credit will grow exponentially into something greater. To summarize, we spoke about, this is our last slide, we spoke about the 4 parts of self and why that's important, how each of them lead into each other. That was the self-awareness, the self-concept, the self-esteem, and the self-control. We spoke about Maslow and how self-esteem is important in the context of learning and self-actualization, but we do have to make sure that our other needs are met. And it's important to understand that self-esteem is a need. It's not a luxury. It's not a want. It's a need. It's something we're created with. The values of self-esteem, the plus and minus of the fact that self-esteem is part of a social context. And then we went through some of those practical techniques of how to build our self-esteem, primarily the focusing on the positive, the showing interest in their lives, developing that optimistic explanatory style, training them to view themselves as a friend, putting them in a position to give to other people, and everyone can give to other people, making sure they are protected in their environment, making sure their physical needs are taken care of, that they look good, they're getting their sleep. We want to encourage mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And again, we want to train them to be positive and focus on the positive and view themselves in a positive light, which they can only do if we view them in a positive light. You know, the power of a teacher. I had a ninth grade student who really was considered just a class neb, and she did not have any friends. And I remember going over to the teacher, and I said, "You are a very popular teacher." She was the teacher in charge of all the extracurricular. And I said, "Everyone loves you." She happens to be a close friend of mine also. I said, "Tell me the truth. Do you get nervous from Helen?" She goes, "Yeah, I really do. She just gets me nervous." I said, "I know, and I don't blame you. She's the type of kid to get you nervous. She asks questions just to bother you. She giggles at the wrong time. She's the type of kid who could get you nervous. But do me a favor. Focus on what you like about her. Make her your favorite student for an experiment, and let's see if that will change her social status in the class." And I'm sure that it was very hard for my friend, this friend of mine, and I give her a tremendous amount of credit, but she did it. And we saw the difference instantaneously. The second that the teacher viewed her in that way, she started viewing herself in that way. The other girls in the class started viewing her in that way. And all it was a real shift in her mindset, a concentrated effort of now I am going to focus on her strengths. And then we ended off with avoiding the pitfalls.